Hi there, in this video we're going to take a look at some workflow techniques working with Logic Pro X and Maschine 2. And I'm on Logic Pro 10.2.2 here, and Maschine is version 2.4.0. So we did a video on this previously, and that was actually using an earlier version of Maschine, and some of the settings in Maschine, mainly the MIDI input settings, we were changed as of version 2.3. So people watch that video, get very confused, and we also received so many questions on the whole subject of working with Maschine and Logic Pro X that we thought we'd do a new video, updated video, and hopefully answer any questions that you may potentially have about this workflow. So if you're using an earlier version of Maschine, I think any earlier than version 2.3, then you're probably better off referring to that video, and we'll put a link in the description so you can just click on that link and go to that video, check that out. But most of you will have updated your Maschine software and you'll be using version 2.4, so this video will be relevant. So I apologise in advance, this video is going to be slightly long, but there's a lot of stuff to cover here, so just bear with us. So I've got my kit, let's have a quick listen to this. And what we want to do is we want to route all the audio from Maschine. So each channel, each one of these individual sounds is coming down its own separate channel on the mixer in Logic. So that's our first step, to route the audio into the mixer in Logic. And then our second step is to have this MIDI here triggering in Logic's main window, so that we can arrange those MIDI parts. And I mean, in this instance we've only got Maschine loaded in this project, but if you were working with a full project and you had bass sounds of vocals and stuff, it'd be nice to just have one arrangement rather than trying to make an arrangement with scenes in Maschine and then also in Logic. So for starters, let's do the audio, and we can just route audio externally. My point out at this stage, actually, because one of the comments that we got on the previous video was how long the setup is, and people just wanted to kind of simplify it a little bit. So what I sometimes do now with working with Maschine and Logic is just drag the audio over and just commit it to audio. So this icon here, just click and hold that, and then you can just drag your whole group over, and then you've just got your group drums here, and then that's it. And then if you wanted to make some changes, you can do, and then re-export it. So what might be more useful is if you click on the piano roll here and then use the audio export option. And then what I've done is I've got the kick selected there, gone on to the piano roll, so it just shows you the kick, the MIDI for the kick there. Drag that over, and it's just dragged the kick on its own now over here. Solo this up. And so you could do that, and then you could go to your clap, drag your clap over, and so on. And very quick, easy way to export audio and then arrange it. However, you're committing stuff to audio there from Maschine, so you don't have any of that access to any of the controls like the sampler or the to pitch the sample or the envelope or any of that sort of stuff. So you're committing it to audio, but it's a much quicker way of working if you wanted to do that. But let's say we're routing the audio here. So we'll go to our kick drum now, and we need to click on that little rotary control icon, and then that gives us our input and output options. And for the kick drum, at the moment it's routed to the group. We want to select external 1 for the kick, and we can do this on our main Maschine page, I guess it's called, with the pattern arranger and stuff. Or if you just hit tab or hit this icon here, you go to your mixer, and then you can do it in your mixer page as well. And so for the clap, we go external 2, closed hat, external 3, and so on. And so we've routed it externally. However, we haven't got Maschine set up here as a multi-output instrument or created the auxiliary channels for those external routing. So what we need to do here is, you might not ordinarily do this, I don't always, but when you load Maschine, you just load it up and you want to get some ideas down, so you don't really think about where you're going to take it next. Well, I don't, at least. Is I've got it loaded as a stereo instrument. We need to set it as a multi-output instrument, so we can select that and it'll actually just reboot Maschine. It reboots the exact same instance, so we still have all our sounds and what have you in here, except now we just have it as a multi-output instrument and we have this plus icon here. So what I can do is just hit this plus icon, keep hitting it until we've got 15 auxiliary tracks there. So this instance of Maschine on this channel, this is our external 1, and then 2 and 3 and 4 and so on. So now we have all our audio routed. Everything's on its own channel in Logic. We could start using Logic's plugins to start processing these individual sounds, which is quite nice. I'll point out at this stage, a few people asked on the previous video, they asked about what if you wanted more than 16 external outs from Maschine. Well, Maschine is limited to 16 external outputs. So if you wanted to have more, you would either need to start grouping stuff up. So you could say, well, all my drums, I'll just have them coming down one channel. So in that instance, you would still have all your individual channels routed to the group, and then the group you would route to external 1, and then you could have, say, some vocal samples on another channel and you would route that to external 2. So you'd either have to start grouping stuff, or if you have it set up like we have and we've used all 16 external outputs from Maschine and you wanted some more, you would need to load a second instance of Maschine, and then that gives you another 16 external outputs. So there's a compromise whichever way you're looking at it, because the second instance of Maschine is going to use more CPU, and it's obviously not ideal to start grouping stuff straight away like that. So, but that's how you bypass that and get more external outputs from Maschine into Logic. So we've got our audio set up. Now we need to look at setting up the MIDI, get the MIDI into Logic. So one thing we need to do first is create tracks for all of these in our main window. So let's highlight all our auxiliary tracks here, all our Maschine outputs, and with all those tracks highlighted, go to our options here, go create tracks for selected channel strips, and then that creates tracks for all of those Maschine channels in our Logic main window. So now we want to get the MIDI in there and get the MIDI triggering in Logic. So one very quick method for doing this is, if we go to our group input options here and set this to active and go to on our group here, right click on this and go down here to group MIDI batch setup and set sounds to MIDI notes. From MIDI channel, set it to MIDI notes. Now what we can do is just get we're dragging the audio over before, get this MIDI icon here, we can just click and drag this and drop it on our Logic main window. It asks to import tempo information, no. And what we've done is we've just dragged this group over. If I now go to an empty scene in Maschine, so I'm not triggering the MIDI in Maschine anymore. You can see our MIDI is now being triggered in Logic. And that would be a very quick way of doing things. It might get slightly confusing because you have all your MIDI on one channel, but then it's all triggering on these different channels. But it's a very quick way of working, and everything's triggering. That might be fine, depending on what workflow you're trying to create, that might be fine. The problem we'll encounter with this group and using that workflow is that if I now mute this MIDI here, go back to Maschine and trigger our scene again. I'm going to solo the bass channel, bass sound 15. We go to our keyboard. You can see we've got a melodic thing happening with this sub bass. I think it's the only thing that had a melodic pattern. And that will not be copying the MIDI over like that, will not copy over that melodic content happening there. So go back to this empty scene. This is the bass up here. See, it's just on one channel, it's just playing one note. So there's an issue there. Using that workflow might be fine, but if you're dragging over melodic stuff, it's not going to trigger. It's going to trigger all the drums fine, but the melodic stuff, it's just put it all on one note. So to have that extra control and to have stuff triggering properly, we need to do individual sounds and set the MIDI input for each individual sound. So for the group, take that off now and go to group MIDI batch setup, put it back to sounds to MIDI channels. And what we need to do now is go to our sound and go to our MIDI input. And to speed up the process slightly, we want all of them selected to host. And this is the section that, as of version 2.3, they changed this little section here. So this started to confuse people watching that previous video. So we can highlight all of our sounds here and select the source to host. And then we need to go through and select different MIDI channels for each sound. So kick, channel 1, clap, channel 2, closed hat, channel 3, and so on. So now we've set up different MIDI channels for each sound. You can see there, going from 1 to 16. And we've put the group MIDI batch setup, we set it back to sounds to MIDI channels, not triggering the scene in Maschine anymore. And now we go here and we can just drag. I need to go back to our scene actually. Go back to our scene and then we can just drag this MIDI over. And I need to make sure I drag it to the very top, like that. Don't import the tempo information. Okay. Make sure I'm on pattern view, otherwise it's only going to drag one MIDI file over, and then drag it over. And we have all our MIDI. And you need to drag it to the very top. Say if I do this now and I just drag it, the pattern over to somewhere in the middle like that. Freaks out a little bit and loads in all these Logic instruments for those MIDI channels. So it is a bit annoying that it does that. So what you need to do is make sure you drag it to the top. So then the first MIDI file will load on the kick drum and then the next 15 will all load properly. And then go and trigger our blank scene in Maschine, and then we should have everything loaded there. Kick, clap, closed hat, open hat, and so on. And so the MIDI is here for us to work with in an arrangement, and everything's triggering on its own individual channel. So there is the workflow. There is a little snag that another one of those changes they made as of version 2.3. So it's worked fine, and also I'd point out as well the sub bass is triggering. And for some reason a hi-hat is triggering as well. I might not have set the input channels correctly. Okay, there you go, snare, sorry. So that needs to be set to 9. Okay, so everything's triggering. Right, let's just delete this MIDI and say you don't always have 16 channels to drag over when you're doing this workflow. Sometimes you create a drum kit and it might only be 8 sounds or something. So let's see what happens in that instance. So I'm going to go ahead and delete some of these sounds now. So we've now only got 8 sounds, and there we can get rid of some of these auxiliary channels as well. We're not using them anymore. So say that's our setup, 8 sounds. Go to our scene here, and we want to drag that over. And this is another one of those changes that just is really annoying, and I don't know why they've kind of changed this behavior. So I dragged this MIDI over, and previously it would just drag over 8 MIDI files for each of these sounds. But now if I drag this over, we'll create all these. For some reason, although we've got 8 empty sound slots here, it still creates a MIDI file for them. And so because you're not dragging 8 MIDI files to 8 tracks here, it freaks out, and then you get all these Logic instruments created, which is really annoying, far from ideal. And so the only workaround I've discovered for this is it takes a little bit longer, but you need to go in your kick here, go to this piano roll, and then what this gives you the ability to do is just drag over the MIDI channel for the kick. So I can just go like that, and then go to my second sound slot, clap, drag that over. I'd like to be able to turn this off as well. This is a new feature in Logic. I think as of version 10.2.2, it always asks you about tempo information when you're importing MIDI. So I'm sure there may be a way to turn that off. So then you can drag over your MIDI files individually like this. And yeah, it takes longer, but that's the workaround really. And go to our empty scene now. So there are a couple of different options. You know, it can be a bit of a long process doing this workflow, and a lot of people have complained about that. That's why you could just drag the audio, export the audio, and it'd be much quicker. But it just depends on the workflow that you want to set up and the way you're working and what you're working with in Maschine. So there's a couple of other things I want to talk about as well. There's a couple of people have asked about, you know, having to do this workflow every time, and because it's a bit of a long workflow. If you do it once, it'd be nice. So you can do it once and just have it as a so say with this here, I've got all this set up. I've got the audio routed in Logic, and I've got the MIDI routed in Maschine, and that'd be very nice. What I could do is just get rid of that pattern, get rid of this MIDI here, and I could just save this as a template. So go to Logic and File, Save as Template, and then I could save it as working with Maschine and Logic Pro X. I think I've got one of these already, I think. So save that. So then when you come to load, so if I shut down Logic now, and I come to load Logic again, and go new from template, and I have my template there, and then this loads everything up for me. And then what you can do is you can go into your browser, and I could load, say, a different kick in here. And then start working like that. The slight problem with this is that if you load sounds in here, So if I load a new sound onto that kick channel there, it keeps all of those MIDI input settings, so everything triggers in Logic when you load new sounds. However, if I load a new group here and go, oh, I like this, I'm just going to load a new group, unfortunately it loads over those MIDI input settings, and so it's all lost when you load a new group. So it's saving it as a template, working with new sounds and new samples is fine. Loading a new group and the group MIDI input settings load with the group. So hopefully this video will have answered most of the questions you might have about working with Maschine and Logic Pro X. Of course, if it's not, then please get in touch, ask us any questions. We check the YouTube comments daily, so we will get back to you. And yeah, thanks for watching. Cheers.